Welcome back to my inner sanctum. I'm your hostess, Countess Elizabeth, mistress of the macabre. World War II is arguably one of the most important conflicts in human history. In today's video, we will investigate the deadliest U.S. naval disaster during World War II, the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. This disaster was not only deadly because of the initial sinking, but because it resulted in one of the worst mass shark attacks in recorded history. So, let us tread water as we wait for rescue and explore our grotesque curiosity. USS Indianapolis was a Portland-class heavy cruiser of the United States Navy, named for the city Indianapolis, Indiana. In late July 1945, USS Indianapolis had been on a special secret mission, delivering parts of the first atomic bomb to the Pacific island of Tinian, where American B-29 bombers were based. With its job done, the warship, with 1,197 men on board, was sailing west towards Leyte in the Philippines when it was attacked by a Japanese submarine. The first torpedo struck without warning just after midnight on July 30th, 1945. The second torpedo fired from the Japanese submarine almost tore the ship in half. As fires raged below, the huge ship began to list onto its side. The order came to abandon ship. As the ship rolled, a crew member named Cox clambered to the topside and tried to jump into the water. He hit the hull and bounced into the ocean. In his account, he states, "I turned and looked back. The ship was heading straight down. You can see the men jumping from the stern, and you could see the 4 propellers still turning. 12 minutes. Can you imagine a ship that is 610 feet long? That's 2 football fields in length, sinking in 12 minutes? It just rolled over and went under. Some 300 of the crewmen aboard went down with the ship. The Indianapolis did not have sonar to detect submarines. The captain, Charles McVeigh, had asked for an escort, but his request was turned down. The U.S. Navy also failed to pass on information that Japanese submarines were still active in the area. The Indianapolis was all alone in the Pacific Ocean when it sank, with few lifeboats and many without life jackets. The remainder of the crew was set adrift. I never saw a life raft. I finally heard some moans and groans and yelling, and swam over, and got with a group of about 30 men, and that's where I stayed. We figured that if we could just hold out for a couple days, they'd pick us up," said Cox. But no one was coming to the rescue. Although the Indianapolis had sent several SOS signals before it sank, somehow the messages weren't taken seriously by the Navy, nor was much notice taken when the ship failed to arrive on time. The Navy would not send help until 4 days after the sinking. About 900 men, survivors of the initial torpedo attack, were left drifting in groups in the expanse of the Pacific Ocean. And beneath the waves, another danger was lurking. Drawn by the carnage of the sinking, hundreds of sharks from miles around headed towards the survivors. We were sunk at midnight. I saw one the first morning after daylight. They were big. Some of them, I swear, were 15 feet long, remembers Cox. They were continually there, mostly feeding off the dead bodies. Thank goodness that there were a lot of dead people floating in the area. But soon, they came for the living, too. We were losing 3 or 4 men each night and day," said Cox. "You were constantly in fear because you'd see them all the time. Every few minutes you'd hear their fins. 12 to 24 fins in the water. They would come up and bump you. I was bumped a few times. You never know when they are going to attack you. Some of the men would pound the water, kick and yell when the sharks attacked. Most decided that sticking together in a group was their best defense. But with each attack, the clouds of blood in the water, the screaming, the splashing, and more sharks would come. It is estimated that sharks killed around 150 people who were treading water. In that clear water, you could see the sharks circling. Every now and then, like lightning, one would come straight up and take a sailor and take him straight down. One came up and took a sailor next to me. It was just somebody screaming, yelling, getting bit. The sharks, though, were not the main killer. Under the scorching sun, day after day, without any food or water for days, men were dying from exposure or dehydration. As their life jackets became waterlogged, many became exhausted and drowned. You could barely keep your face out of the water. The life preserver had blisters on my shoulders, blisters on top of blisters. It was so hot we would pray for dark, and then when it got dark we would pray for the daylight. because it would get so cold our teeth would chatter. Cox remembers, struggling to stay alive, desperate for fresh water, terrorized by sharks. Some survivors began to become delirious. Many started to hallucinate, imagining secret islands just over the horizon, or that they were in contact with friendly submarines coming to the rescue. Cox recalls a sailor believing that the Indianapolis had not sunk, but was floating just within reach just beneath the surface. The drinking water was kept on the second deck of our ship, he explains. A buddy of mine was hallucinating and he decided he would go down to the second deck to get a drink of water. All of a sudden, his life preserver was floating, but he wasn't there. Then he comes up and saying how good and cool the water was, and we should get us a drink. He was drinking salt water, of course. He died shortly afterwards. And as each day and night passed, more men died. Then, by chance, on the fourth day, a Navy plane flying overhead spotted some men in the water. By then, there were fewer than 10 people in Cox's group, which initially had 30. Initially, the sailors thought they were missed by the planes flying over. Then, just before sunset, a large seaplane suddenly appeared, changing direction and flying over the group. The guy in the hatch of the plane stood there waving at us. Now that was when the tears came and your hair stood up on end because you knew you were saved. You knew you were found, at least. That was the happiest time of my life, Cox remembers. Navy ships raced to the site and began looking for the groups of sailors dotted around the ocean. All the while, Cox simply waited, scared, in a state of shock, drifting in and out of consciousness. It got dark and a strong big light from heaven out of the cloud came down, and I thought it was angels coming. But it was the rescue ships, shining its spotlight up into the sky to give the sailors hope and let them know somebody was looking for them. Sometimes during the night, I remember strong arms pulling me into a little itty-bitty boat. Just knowing I was saved was the best feeling you can have. Of a crew of almost 1,200, only 317 sailors survived the sinking. Well, that was truly a grotesque tale. These poor souls are the casualties of war, however necessary their service was to their people and country. To me, it just seems like they weren't allowed to know that the Japanese subs were there, so their leaders put all those men in harm's way, though I'm sure they knew death was a risk when it comes to war. Either way, may the souls of those lost sailors rest in peace. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe, like, and share if you would also like to keep exploring our grotesque curiosity. We will meet again in the darkness of the night.